And I'm very happy to be here. And Brianne, thank you for that lovely introduction that I wrote.
I spent a lot of time on it.
Thank you. You just heard that this is my first memoir, and it is also a story of survival and love. It's a romance novel that covers about 18 months beginning in March of 2011, where my husband was either hospitalized or recovering from his illness. I'm going to read a little blurb from the back cover. Retired Police Lieutenant Lee Schwartz teeters on the edge of death as his brain and body are ravaged by an insidious bacterial infection. Afraid to leave his hospital bedside, Lee's wife keeps a journal. One doctor has a theory and begins treatment immediately. But is he right? Is it soon enough to save Lee's life? After organ failure, seizures, medications all cause brain trauma, Anne-Marie wonders, what will her husband be like? Will he remember her? Will he still love her? After joining Writers Alliance of Gainesville in 2013, I had the amazing good fortune to be added to a super good critique pod, and they did everything to guide me on this writing adventure. Some members were already published authors. Some were wannabes, like myself, and several had won writing contests, so I knew I was in good hands. The best thing about Critique Pod membership is the feedback. The worst thing about Critique Pod membership is the feedback. If you are thin-skinned, sensitive, not that I was ever crushed by anything they said, it can be rough. I had wanted to write something for as long as I can remember. I wanted to be a published author, but I had never worked on the school paper, I had never taken any writing classes, and I really had no experience. I tried writing a novel once, and it stunk. It was awful. Lisa, come on in. So fortunately, my husband Lee got deathly ill, clung to life by a very thin thread. I kept notes, and voila, I had a book. A friend said it was like birthing a baby. She did all the work, but she couldn't have done it without him. It is now a pretty neat read, if I do say so myself, but let me not dally with self-praise, and instead I'll give you a sampling. I'm not going to start at chapter 1. I'll go skip to chapter 4, and it might sound like I'm giving away the whole story, but this is not nearly the whole story. This is like movie trailers where you go and you watch for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and you think, oh, I've seen the movie. This is not the whole movie. Chapter 4, and so it begins. I slept on the gurney with Lee until they took him away for a contrast CT scan at 2 a.m. When they brought him back, I was scrunched across 2 plastic chairs. Not wanting to wake him, I slept there in the freezing cold with all the glaring lights. Lee seemed to be deeply asleep. At mid-morning, they formally admitted Lee to the hospital and moved him into the room. I had called our 3 adult children the night before, and now I sent a text update letting them know Lee's status, which I didn't really have much to say about because nothing definitive had been explained to us. Later, they brought lunch, which consisted of liquids, juice, and gelatin. Why can't he eat real food, I wonder? He has no tests scheduled. That afternoon, I had a very bitter, angry husband. Get me out of here, he said repeatedly. I laughed at first, and then I realized he was serious, but not thinking clearly. This Lee acted completely different from the man in the ER who had hardly paid attention. Later, as Lee napped, a nurse came to tell me that his internist had ordered consultations with a hematologist, a gastroenterologist, a pulmonologist, a urologist, and an infectious disease specialist. Why, I asked. The doctors want to get their opinions. Again, I asked, why? Because the doctor needs to know what they think. The nurse tried to leave. I walked towards her. Think about what? She stopped at the door. About what's going on with your husband. What's going on with my husband? What does that mean? I had thought these consultations were merely signal thoroughness. A short time later, the same nurse came in and smiled strangely as she picked up the phone receiver next to Lee's bed and handed it to me. It's the doctor. Lee was sitting up in bed having his vital signs measured and blood drawn. He had awakened from his nap, acting like his usual self. Oh, good, I thought. He was just sleep deprived. I'm Dr. Gupta, the woman said on the phone. I am the hospitalist internist who saw your husband last night. We have the results of the CT scan, and it doesn't look good. I couldn't say a word. He has a mass on his stomach, a lesion on his left kidney. His left lung has some collapse. There's a spot on his other lung and one on his liver. The pancreas was not visible. I have called some specialists to see him tonight or tomorrow morning. I stood silently as my body began to tremble. Are you okay, Mrs. Schwartz? Do you understand what I said? Yes, I understand. I spoke softly and calmly as I turned my back to Lee. But the doctors have to talk to me, not my husband alone. I will always be available. We hung up and I turned back to face Lee. The tech had left and we were alone. Lee announced that his blood pressure was excellent, something he'd always been proud of. I walked to his side and held his hand in mine. Babe, I'm so sorry. I have very bad news. I mechanically told him what I had just learned. I tried to keep my voice steady. Lee looked at me for 5 long seconds. He didn't say, why me, or what the hell are you talking about? He looked directly into my eyes, steady as a rock, and said, we'll just wait and see what happens. I squeezed into the bed with him and sobbed, I'm sorry, over and over with my head on his chest. That was me, pillar of strength. We don't know anything for sure yet, Lee said. Let's just wait for the other doctors and don't say anything to the kids. Now that's only chapter 4, page 14, 65 chapters total. I took copious notes while Lee was hospitalized. Starting from the first day, I wrote down everything anybody said or did. There was so much information, there were so many things to know, and I didn't want to take a chance of missing a thing. So even if as I was beginning to write this 20 months later, I was surprised to read some of the notes and realize what he had gone through that I had forgotten. I wrote the story from the notes, and all my emotions came back for the time he was hospitalized. I hope you will also feel those emotions. This is me. This is from 2020. I was interviewed for the Our Town book. Gigi in here. Another paid guest. And they quoted me here. It says, to me, this is a story that had to be written. I wanted to write it. I felt that for a lot of reasons, people should hear it. They should know about the experience itself, be more aware of tick bites in general, the fact that he came so close to dying, and how he was saved needs to be told. One friend of mine, who of course knew that Lee survived, said she could not stop reading because she was afraid Lee would die if she put the book down. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. It's a privilege to be here, to this huge audience. For anyone who'd like to buy a copy, I'm at table 49, the same as my age. Oh, no. That's the year I was born. I'm sorry. The book is $15 here from me, as opposed to $15.95 from Amazon. And with Amazon, you have to pay tax and shipping, and for me, you get a signed copy. And again, if you have any questions, if you want to know any more about it, we have time, obviously. You can ask me now, and I'll be downstairs otherwise. Anybody? Any questions? Make up something. Yes, miss?
I read the book and it's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. And what an insight into the medical field.
I was going to ask if you shared it with the Dean of the School of Medicine.
No, I have not. This was at North Florida, and I have to say this about the nurses. They were the best part. I mean, not that there was a good part, but they were almost all so wonderful. There's one guy in here you'll find.
Well, I ask because so many of the medical students and even nursing staff, I think, often have a hard time understanding what it is from the patient and family's perspective, and what insight that might provide for them as something to...
There's a little bit in the book about that, and one of the things, the book is dedicated to a friend named Robin, who was my advocate. She is a registered nurse. She's been in nursing 30-some years at that point. And she drove up at least once a week from Ocala to be with me, and she was on the phone, available anytime, day or night. And one of the things she said, a very practical piece of advice, she said, get some pictures and put them up in the room. Make sure he looks clean, shave him when you can, because you don't want him to look like just a sick person. You want him to look like a real person. And it's important. And also, if you ever have a loved one in the hospital, if you have to be in the hospital yourself, have an advocate. Somebody has to be there to speak up, to think clearly, to not be the one in pain, sleeping through some of the diagnoses. You know, you have to be the one. Somebody has to be the one for you to do that. Any other questions?
Just from what I've learned in these few short minutes, I'm wondering, is there like a, I don't know, I don't want to say a study guide, but you know, something like a workbook or something like that, where to go along with your story, so that people can apply it to their lives? It'd be so
Actually,
valuable.
I really think that everything's in here, because it's a lot of days to be in the hospital. And the recovery was not linear. It was kind of like this. So there's a lot, I really do believe it's a teaching book as well. So yeah, there's a lot to learn from the experience.
I haven't read the book, but how is it today?
It's pretty good.
Oh.
Spicy. As I often
yeah.
tell people, it has a great ending.
I like that.
And with that, thank you very much.
Very good, very good.
What's more questions?
Read more.
Will you write another book?
I have one I'm working on right now.
Are you? What's it about?
All right, I have two. One is his story of all of his years in law enforcement.
Wow.
And the other one is a story, it's a supernatural story about experiences I had back in the 90s with some friends, talking to spirit guides.
Wow.
All right, let's see. In contrast to the previous night, Lee, and therefore I, had the best night's sleep yet. He woke every 2 hours to pee, almost like clockwork, and then went back to sleep. That means I got up every 2 hours. We got married again before breakfast. It was a small private ceremony. For 46 days, since the afternoon of his surgery, I've been wearing Lee's wedding band. I said it was time for us to make things right, and I easily placed the ring on his skinny finger. He looked at his hand, waved it around, and said, "It's back where it belongs." Oh.
Did you write the title?
Actually, yes, I did, but it came to me like this. I told Lee what it was, and he said, "Perfect." So, because he was at that point. My sister did the book cover for me. She lived up in Connecticut at the time. And I said, I have no idea what to do. I know I want the tick on the cover. I don't know colors. I don't know anything to do. She goes, you know, that's my job, right? I said, no. Oh, okay, you're going to come in handy finally. Anything else? Anybody?
Okay, Anne Marie, I'm sorry, I came in a little bit late, so maybe you already talked about this, but what was the initiating moment that you said, oh, we gotta get Lee to the hospital?
Hi. I was out of town when he got sick. When I came into town, he had 103-degree fever. He thought he was fine. He's outside, he's working in the yard, there are no problems. And I said, we need to go do something about this. So the first time we went to the hospital, and then we came back, and then we went to the hospital 3 days later because the antibiotics didn't work.
Yeah.
And then where I picked up at he was on the gurney in the emergency room, is where the big things start.
Right, okay.
The drama. So I'm sorry y'all didn't get to hear the beginning. I have time. My book is a memoir. It's also a love story, and it's also the story of my husband's recovery after being bitten by a tick back in 2011. He was this close to dying. The doctor said he had a 9 out of 10 chance of not making it. So it was pretty hairy and scary all the way around. And the book was written because I wrote notes. I took notes over everything that he had gone through. That way I had everything accurately written down, and I could write a story without having to rely on my memory. So it's pretty, I would say, emotional and very well written. But I belong to the Writers Alliance of Gainesville. I belong to one of their pods, and I had a lot of guidance with the writing because everybody helps everybody, and they give you tips and pointers, and it comes in very handy. So if anybody's thinking of writing anything, join Writers Alliance. We have a member here, we have a member there, and join a critique pod, and they will give you all the help really, more help than you thought you needed. I speak from experience.
What do you think motivated you to want to write it from many years ago?
One of those things, you know, like you want to be a teacher when you grow up. It's just something that comes to you at some point. I just knew I wanted to write something. And I had told my husband years and years before that, I said, you know, I've got a book in me, I just don't know what it is yet. Well, thanks, hon.
Have your kids read the book?
This is kind of funny. Our kids have all read some of the book. Most of them go through to look for where their name is.
Oh.
I read my part, yes. So I stopped telling them that you're in the middle or whatever. You gotta get to it. Gotta get to it. Anything else? How are we doing, Brian?
Good, you still have another couple minutes. 3 minutes to be exact.
I could do my song and dance
We'd love to.
if I had one. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you again. I appreciate that you are here on this cold winter day in sunny Florida.
You're delightful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, we knew that.
So's my book.